Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Paddle Pursuit Podcast. I'm back here today, Robert Norman, and I'm here with John Batson, who runs one of the coolest races. I would say it's the coolest race in South Carolina. So you got the whole state on lock. Very high quality event, Lowcountry Bpil. John, also a high level sup racer, previous Chattajack winner, jumped on the scene in the last few years. Well, not it's been longer now, but came out of nowhere, super fast, awesome guy, starting to get into the surf ski a little bit. Major player in the southeast region here for the U.S. John, thank you so much for taking time coming out on the show.
Thanks, Robert. These podcasts are great. I've enjoyed listening to the other guests, and I think you had a lot of insightful information along the way, so it's been great.
Cool. Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm a huge fan of paddling and all the people that are, part of the sport, and it's a great platform to showcase it. So tell us about your paddling, or tell us about your background leading into paddle racing on the subs, right? I remember you just popped up out of nowhere at one of the Carolina Cups and you were super fast. It's like, well, who is this guy, right? So kind of give us some of that history leading up to that.
Yeah, it's a long story. I'll try to make it. She had put me in a bunch of sports camps, and nothing really was clicking. Didn't have a dad around to teach me to do some of the practicing that went along with these other sports. But one time she said, "Okay, you're doing a windsurfing camp," and I thought, "Oh God, here we go again." Last one picked, and I'll probably drown out there. But surprisingly, it went really well. I don't know, things just click sometimes for people, and for me, that was a big deal in my life. The instructors, the people there became my second family. I ended up working for this shop, which was the busiest windsurfing kind of destination on the East Coast at the time. And then I ended up racing windsurfing and was on the junior development team for the Olympics. So it was kind of doing that at a high level. I was a better windsurfer than I was competitive sailor. I just didn't have all the, I guess, the strategy that went into some of the racing, but kind of carried that along through much of my youth. And somewhere around high school, college, the recreational sea kayaks came along. And one of the guys that worked at the shop brought one down. That happened to be Steve Jordan, that's big in the perception world, and now Hurricane kayaks. And so anyway, we kind of found at that shop that we could take tourists out and see a lot of the waterway. And within 2 hours, they were really enjoying it, learning a lot, versus windsurfing, where we were teaching them. It was taking, 6 hours, and they could kind of barely get out and come back, to the same spot in very calm conditions. So, the sea kayaking became very popular. And for me, it was kind of in high school. And so I started to develop an interest in biology and marine biology. And sometime he brought down one of these faster, kind of closed deck boats, the Chinook, and then the Sea Lion and Eclipse after that. And I got in it, and I found it was a great workout. So that was kind of my intro to some paddling, where I really was thinking more about fitness, not just getting out and seeing the nature and all that stuff. So I carried one of these boats around with me through med school and residency. And when we eventually got married, moved back down to Hilton Head, one of the guys at the shop who I stayed in close contact with, they said, "Oh, we got this new thing, a stand-up paddleboard. You need to come try it. We're having a demo day." And I went, and it was one of these heavy round nose, boards with aluminum paddle. And I said, "Nope, I'm not ready for that. That's not it yet for me." And probably like a year or so later, they said, "Oh, we got this new board. It's the Bark Dominator. You got to come check this thing out." So I tried that thing out, and I said, "Now this is something. I'm, able to go fast." I enjoyed it. It was carbon paddle. So things had changed a little bit. And so I really just kind of liked the kayak. I just did it for fitness. And for me, I enjoyed running and cycling, but for me, this was a way to get outside and do something for my upper body. And so that was what I was doing. I was training in that fashion, and I wasn't at all racing. But I just remember we were sitting, probably scrolling through Facebook, and I saw some ad for Carolina Cup that said something like, "Come test yourself against the best." And I said, "I got to do it." And so I did 2 small races, and then I went and did the graveyard. So that was the intro to stand-up paddling.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, the Bark Dominator, definitely a blast from the past at this point. And you're right, it was one of the first boards to revolutionize what the performance of a SUP could be. And my era of starting SUP was just right after that. So
Okay.
every board company started, they went from the Dominator and they had to have their own, right? So they started playing
Yeah.
with the width, the thickness, and the outline, but that was the first to get it going. So that's really cool. So it's common that windsurfers make the transition into SUP. Were there a lot of carryover skills from the windsurf into SUP that made that transition simple?
I think so. I mean, obviously, we're with a windsurfer, you're hanging onto the boom and the sail, and that's kind of your extra stability. Where with stand-up paddling, you have your paddle. So in some ways, it's similar like that. And obviously, there's a lot of footwork involved, especially with some of the longer windsurfers. You're walking just like you would a longboard surfboard. So to do pivot turns, and you kind of do that on some of these longer windsurfers. It was very similar. You just, instead of holding the sail, you're holding the paddle. Um, and I think obviously there's just kind of a lot of balance proprioception that you get doing windsurfing that's very similar with stand-up paddling. And so all the little wake, little chop, you kind of just, you're already absorbing that. It's not something you really think about.
So doing the graveyard course at Carolina Cup at the time, biggest race, in this part of the U.S. Tell us about some of your interactions with the community as you first started to get integrated with this big event, ultimately into the Chattajack, and some of the other things going on this part of the U.S.
Well, it was a huge just learning experience going to this race. I mean, the best, that was kind of at the height of paddleboarding, so the greats were standing on the beach with me, and I was kind of awestruck because I mean, some of the folks I knew from just windsurfing or surfing, and so I was kind of standing there, just wide-eyed and very nervous, like, what have I gotten myself into here? Because I hadn't downwinded, I hadn't drafted, I hadn't done all this stuff, but it was kind of interesting because I just got a decent start at the race, and I kind of did pretty well getting. I only fell once or twice getting around to the first inlet, and it was, I just distinctly remember kind of trying to work into a train of other paddlers, and I was thinking to myself, I can paddle faster than this, and I'd get out of the train and try to go. And I just remember thinking, I guess I can't paddle faster than this, and I'd get back in the train. So I was zigzagging all over the place, which is similar to what I do now. But I remember someone behind me was kind of barking instructions in a nice way. I shouldn't say barking, but just kind of, you're in race mode, so they're kind of trying to tell me stuff. And sure enough, it was Jimmy Terrell. He was behind me and trying to point me in the right direction on how to draft, which was great. But I finished the race. I really didn't feel like I did that great, but I was happy I finished it. And people some folks started texting me when we were driving home, and that was all the encouragement that I needed to kind of continue on, because I didn't know how I did compared to other people. I didn't know where I stood and all that. And so a few people texted me and said, "Man, great job out there." And so that was really all I needed. Then I started looking into the Southern Stoke Paddle Series, and I did a few of those races. And later in that season, one of my friends, Jeremy Whitted, who I raced a lot with that year, he said, "Man, you got to do Chattajack. I think you'll do well at Chattajack." And I don't know what he was really seeing, but I said, "Okay, I'll sign up for Chattajack." And I hadn't done any endurance really in a very, very long time. Interestingly, we used to have a long paddle around Hilton Head, which was like 36 miles. And we did that a few years as a race. But really since that, and that was in the late 90s, early 2000s. But since that time, I hadn't done any real endurance. I was fit. I was pretty fit, I think, just at the time. And so it to me was, I started training on Paddle Monster under Larry. I met him the day before Chattajack when we raced. And so that was kind of how I ended up getting to Chattajack that first year.
So tell us about some of the progression from the first Chattajack ultimately to claiming a title.
It's a long road. I think ultimately that first Chattajack was still my most memorable and most meaningful. And I think just kind of put me somewhat in the spotlight with some other paddlers, just because, like you said, a lot of people said, man, who are you? Where did you come from? And I just was not necessarily in a race mindset. Like I remember, just for an example, before that Carolina Cup, like 2 days before, I paddled hard 9 miles and said, I think I'm ready for this Carolina Cup. And that's not what you do before a big race. And so I was kind of doing things all wrong until I got onto the paddle monster training. And so I was starting to think a little bit more like an athlete rather than just kind of muscling through it. But that first race, I don't know, I got a great start, and I met Larry the day before, and I just remember somewhere around mile 3 or 4, he kind of turned to his side and he said, "Who is that, John?" And so, from that point on in the race, we were working. Bart Deswart was also, up there. And so the three of us were just taking 10-minute shifts, and same thing as Carolina Cup. I just learned a ton during that race. That was the year that it dropped like 20 degrees when we were out there. And I was in shorts and a t-shirt, and by the end of the race I was just frozen. But I hung on, and I was really proud. Every time I took the lead paddling, one, I wasn't very good at drafting, so I enjoyed leading a lot better. But two, I just kind of, in my mind, I was like, man, I'm winning Chattajack right now. And so it just motivated me. And Larry would say, "Oh, great pull." And I just needed that little encouragement, and I was like, okay, this is great. I'm loving this. And that Chattajack for me meant a lot. It sealed the deal. I was hooked on racing, and ever since then, it's been a bit more stressful to show up to Chattajack rather than somewhat unexpected. Just enjoy it. But I came in third that year. I came in second the next year. I came in fourth the following year when Danny and Oliver showed up from France. And then I came in second behind Tim Oliver the next year. So I was kind of just hovering around the top box for 4 years there. So the fifth year I did win it, but it was 5 years in the making. It wasn't like just that one year I trained differently or anything like that. It just, all the moons kind of aligned. So
Yeah, it's awesome. It's really cool, seeing that progression, because you're right. Like, my hobby is looking at race results and seeing people's names, seeing how they do. Are they better here? Are they better there? They have a good year, a bad year, and so on. And you're right. Your name is always in the top 5 there, right? So seeing it finally hit the pinnacle,
yeah.
from a fan standpoint, definitely really, really cool. So, talking about Chattajack, right? That kind of represents SUP at sort of the highest level that we have on this side of the country. It has one of the highest attendance rates. It has the most repeat racers and whatnot. So from doing it from 2017, looking at it to last year, tell us some of your perspective on how the community has changed or how the event has changed. Like, give us some of your insight about SUP in general in that 6-year journey.
Yeah, I think, we have two big bookends on the East Coast. We have Carolina Cup, and then we have Chattajack, and in between there's a bunch of little stuff. And obviously the numbers for paddleboarding overall are down. I think some people have shifted to surf ski or OC or just gone on to different hobbies and whatnot. So I think, the first couple years with Chattajack were also a bit more meaningful, just because there was a pretty solid top 20, guys that were showing up there. I mean, it was pretty competitive for that lead group. And it's interesting, for those 5 years that I was racing it, it was basically me and the Canadians. It was it was me and Larry, or me and Tim Oliver. And so it's an interesting race that's kind of who shows up for it. Some pretty elite Canadian athletes. And then it's shifted a little bit, I think, where there's not as many American top paddleboarders showing up. I think it'd be really cool to see one year all the pros show up to that thing and just have a huge draft pack going down the river, and see how that plays out. But same thing as Carolina Cup. It's still a big paddleboard race as we have it now. Still 200 plus stand-up paddlers showing up, but it's just not as big. It's not as thick a elite level, going to that race at this point. So, and I think, surf ski's become more competitive as some folks drifted that way, or OC has become more competitive. So, I think everything has a bit of a cycle, and we'll see kind of what happens moving forward.
So with SUP being your primary race tool, you do delve into the surf ski a little bit. You're at the Nooga Loop in the V10, and so give us some insight. Being somebody that has paddled a sit-down craft with a rudder, different mode of transport, the compare and contrast that to SUP. And is there any insight on people shifting into the sit-down craft and shying away from the SUP from your perspective?
Well, like I mentioned, I always kind of had paddled a plastic kayak, kind of a nicer plastic kayak. So I think that was kind of an easy transition for me to hop in a surf ski. I did find it was a lot more tippy than I expected at first. I bought that used V10 from Justin Shea, and to some degree it's been nice because I haven't worried about that as much as I have SUP. I just got that boat, I got one paddle, and that's what I've used. And for me, it's just been kind of a good cross training tool because, if I do 2 or 3 hard days of some training with SUP, I'm kind of beat, but I still like to get on the water. So it's kind of nice to have just something that's easier on my body. It's just a different kind of muscle system. It's a little more aerobic and not as much grunting, and it's, I think, helped my flexibility a little bit. I remember when I first got in the surf ski, I couldn't sit in it longer than 5 minutes without having to throw my legs out because my hips were killing me. So now I can at least make it through a race like Nooga Loop, and I'm uncomfortable by the end, but at least I can do most of it pretty comfortably. But I love it that you just get a rhythm with that you don't always really get with SUP. Like, it's just, if you get in the zone and you just got everything kind of, you've taught twisting properly with your hips, and you've got your leg drive, and everything's just flowing so smoothly, and it's quiet and it's fast. I love that about it. And like, right now we've got a big tide. So, it's like a 9+ foot tide here. And that's uncomfortable to paddle a SUP in. It's just it's a lot of work. And like last night I got in the ski and it wasn't too bad. It was noticeable, but not too bad. So it's a little bit more kind of a level 2, 3 aerobic workout, using just a different muscle system. I think it's, it's so smooth. It's, when you get in that zone with it, I think it's just different than SUP. SUP's a bit more grunting and difficult, especially if it's windy or the current's moving. And I think, I'm sure OC is a little bit like that too, where you're just gliding a bit more. And for some of these days, especially around here where we have big tides or big wind, it's kind of nice to avoid that here and there.
Yeah, I for all of my paddle disciplines, all of them originally were cross training for SUP, and then the floodgates just open and they kind of slowly take over everything. So there's a lot of parallels between surf ski and SUP, from the stability ratings, the widths, the speeds, ocean accessibility, flat water accessibility. So there's a lot of compare and contrast there. But the mode of transport's totally different. The wing blade is really weird, real funky, 2 blades versus the SUP. And then the actual mode of transport for the canoe versus the SUP is much more 1-to-1, but the stability is, much different having an AMA. Is there a reason you haven't gravitated towards the outrigger canoe as you've made this transition to other sit-down craft?
Well, interestingly, I for Christmas this year bought myself an OC1 paddle. So I think it's coming. One of my friends here did buy an OC1, and really it's just been like the last few weeks the water's gotten warm that I hadn't really wanted to be swimming earlier than that. So I suspect I'll be trying his out and just pick a race to try to go and do one time. And I think I'll like it. I've paddled it before, nothing substantial, but I think it's something I'll like. I love seeing guys cruising on big swells with those things. And I think what I probably envision is still doing a lot of training with SUP, because I still think that's one of the best workouts you can do, but probably gravitating towards some of the longer events with surf ski and OC, I suspect.
Yeah, one of the major popularities with outrigger canoes stems from the team paddling dynamics of the OC6, Dragon Boat, and so all of that trickles down to raising the popularity of the OC1. And so if there was like a 20-person SUP team, and then you could go to like a 6-man and a 4-man and a one. You would see, a lot different of a like community and culture versus like sup and surf ski. It's mostly individuals, right? Like you just
Yeah.
start it, you do it by yourself, you don't need a team. And then outrigger canoe in direct contrast is 90% of the time is directly related to a nearby organization or club or group, right? So it changed like it's interesting that the culture of each sport kind of dictates, who's involved in it, who takes it seriously, who does it as cross training, and so on. So the epicenter of all of these different paddlecraft is the Lowcountry Boil, right? We got a big
Right.
race open to everybody. John gets you up on a podium. You can race a flower pot, and he will recognize your efforts out there on the water. Tell us about participating in races and then making that pivot into hosting events. Some of the work that goes into it, some of the mentality that goes to making that so successful.
Well, those first few years that I was doing a lot of the Southern Stoke paddle series, I kept coming back to Hilton Head and just saying, it's crazy to me we don't have a paddle event down here. And I was on and still I'm on the Outside Foundation board, and our mission with that foundation, it's a nonprofit. We get kids in their middle school years in a kayak so they learn about the local waterways down here. And so at one of the meetings, I kind of came back to the guy that taught me how to windsurf. He's the director of the board. And I said, I really think we need to have a paddle event here, and we could benefit the Outside Foundation with that event. And kind of like when probably when you started your school, it's just like, well, okay, you do it. So, it was just something that I said we should do it, and he said you should do it, and that's how it happened. And I think it's been good for me just being out and being racing, because I was seeing what was good and what maybe could be improved at certain races, and then trying to just think about how I wanted to, what a type of event I wanted to have, and what we try to do. Hilton Head's a great destination. I mean, it's frequently voted #1 island in America, for wherever these polls are, it comes up high on the list. And I think there's value to small races that, you don't have a bunch of different divisions and trophies and this and that gets complicated. But I wanted an event that really highlighted what Hilton Head kind of was, which is kind of a nice place. And so I wanted nice trophies that people would go away with, and so I have a friend of mine that paints those trophies on the mason jars. And I didn't mention that that same individual that I grew up windsurfing with, he now owns instead of it being windsurfing Hilton Head, it transitioned to an outdoor outfitter outside Hilton Head. And one of their clients was OluKai. And he happened to be meeting with one of the heads of OluKai, and they said, we really would like an event on the East Coast. And this just happened to coincide when I came to him and said, I really think we should have a paddle event here. And so, these moons aligned, and so we got OluKai as a sponsor. So that kind of bumped up the level of the event as well. They basically give product to any podium finisher. And I guess for me, it's been good just to bring in a lot of different people in the community. So a lot of the sponsors end up being people that I refer to for physical therapy, or doctors that I work with. The catering is done by people we know really well. And, it's just I think, like you said, it's a really nice event. And I'd like it to be an event that highlights not just SUP, but all the boats that are out there. So especially surf ski, OC, prone. And one of my friends still has one of those plastic kayaks, and I said, I'll make your division the reasonably fast kayak, because it's not a sit on top, but it was, something he could paddle reasonably fast. So we try to have fun with it, but also, kind of have it be a bigger event. It's so fun to be down here, and we don't have a lot of paddlers on Hilton Head, but to see all these boats on the island for that weekend, traveling around on cars. And I think for the spectators, it's cool because they're like, man, I've never seen a surf ski before, an OC before. So, for a lot of them, it's just kind of an eye-opening thing to see legitimate athletes, really some of the best here. and some very fast boats that are just so different than what they're used to, that's sitting on their dock, big plastic, stand-up paddleboard or kayak that's heavy and slow. So I do try to, I love having the elite level athletes come, but we do try to get, people out that are beginners and have a fun 5K event as well. So, I think it's a lot of moving parts, and fortunately, I think I've got a lot of good friends helping out that, when I asked them, they said, sure, we can do that, or we can do this. And so, you start getting involved with these type events and you quickly realize it is a lot of work to coordinate it. This will be our 6th year, so at least I've done it enough to know some obvious mistakes to avoid, and have my checklist to go down. And so, for people that are looking to start a race, you got to, look at safety. So you're going to have some type of crew out there. I use athletic trainers that we use on the sidelines for football games in sports medicine. They're a great resource, and they like being out there. They like getting the food and getting on the boat and all that stuff. We also have some local water rescue folks, and then the captains with Outside Hilton Head that help us out. So that's one thing you got to have. Then you get a water permit from the Department of Natural Resources. There's some agency, I'm sure, for all the lakes and whatnot that's similar. And, the town permits, that's an issue. Sometimes with lower numbers, you don't necessarily have to have a special event permit, but that's something you have to check that box as well. And then decide if you're going to have food and shirts and all that stuff, and trophies. So it quickly adds up to a lot of stuff, but I've got it down where at least the majority of things are happening, and we're just trying to make it a great event, that's memorable, that runs smooth. And also at the end, I try to reach out to folks like you and just say, what can we do better? How can I get more OC paddlers? How can I get the more surf ski paddlers? So, I'm probably talking too much, but for stand up, I think a 10K is pretty good. That's a decent race. For OC and surf ski, for some of the elite folks to do it, to travel and do a 10K, you're done in 45 minutes at most, if you're elite level. So, I heard a lot of them saying, we want to make sure it's a longer event if we're going to be driving, a longer race if we're going to be driving away. So, we've got that endurance paddle that goes around Pinckney Island, some of the best water in the area that, it's rare to see boats back there. But that's like 10 to 11 miles. And then we have the 5K, 10K, and we've also added on Sunday a tech race in the beach. And then on Friday, the day before, sprint events as well. So trying to keep it fresh and fun, and something that people want to keep coming back to try.
Yeah, I think it's really one of the highlights of this podcast is trying to help inspire people to make the leap into doing something for the community, whether it's running an organization, if it's hosting a meetup, if it's running a race. And that becomes more and more important as some of the big blockbuster events of the past are starting to look for the door, right? Some of these events won't be around forever. And it's important for the community to reload in a sense, right? So the Lowcountry Bpil has been awesome because it's really growing into one of these giant events, right? And if you had not tried to create this, it wouldn't be here today, right? And we'd be looking at the calendar like, oh man, we wish we had these other things. So for people that are listening, just like John said, if you want to make something happen, you got to just do it. You just got to get up, make it real, and just go through the steps. And as long as there's passion there, everything else will kind of fall into place with a little bit of hard work. And one important thing that you've done is, like you mentioned, having your finger on the pulse of the community, right? Asking questions, changing it to cater to the people that want to come and attend. It's very important. A lot of events that kind of phase out, they're not focusing on the important questions. They're asking these different questions, and over a 10-year lifespan, it doesn't work anymore, right? So I think you're doing something that's really great and doing it the right way. So speaking of it building up, you are now hosting SUP National on the side of the U.S. So give us some insight into that transition becoming a major SUP hub event.
Right. I think, for stand-up paddling, like we've mentioned, there's some things happening with paddleboarding that it's like kind of at transition here. It's like the best of times and the worst of times for stand-up paddling. The best of times in that we've got some organization happening, which is probably a few years kind of behind where, the horse was out of the barn with stand-up paddling and there was, very little organization. And now we've got things happening. Kristen Thomas with USA Sup is just leading a great team of trying to, make things more organized, trying to have a bit more uniformity to 5K, 10K, possibly events having the techs, sprints or technical races and then sprints, with the idea that we would have regional events doing the same type thing and then potentially a national event that would showcase the people from the regions. I kind of make the analogy to USTA tennis. You've got these regions and people win the region, then they go on and on from there. So I think, that's nice that all that's happening. And I think what they did last year was certainly a ambitious effort to host their own USA Sup Nationals. And I think what they're doing now is a better idea so that they're not getting bogged down in running a race. They're going to say, okay, well, where's a successful race on the East Coast? And then we'll move it to the Midwest or back out to the West Coast or some different region. So each year a region is hosting this USA Sup Nationals and they just latch on to a successful event. And on my end, it doesn't change things a lot. And I've tried to emphasize that with other paddlers that are into surf ski and OC, because, I'm still want it to be a quality, meaningful event for those paddlers. And I don't want to leave out prone. But it is changing things a little bit in that, we'll have a live feed, which will be cool. And I want to try to have some of the live feed getting, the other crafts, not just SUP. But the live feed will also benefit us by, having time to talk about the outside foundation, which, running the race is one thing, but the bottom line is for it to be meaningful for that foundation that I'm a part of, it's got to raise money. And so, last year we raised 35 grand for the foundation. It has been a decent fundraiser for us. So, adding USA Sup gives us a little bit of notoriety to go back to sponsors now and say, hey, we're hosting the national championship this year. And for some of them, that doesn't necessarily mean a lot, but for some of them, well, that sounds pretty cool. I'd like to come and see that, and I think I've just being at Carolina Cup recently and Loop, I'm hearing very positive, just thoughts from the paddlers just saying, man, we're looking forward to this year. And so I hope it'll be a good event. I'm optimistic that our numbers will be up there. And I'm really excited to partner with USA Sup just because it adds something and I'm not taking away from the other groups. That's been an important part of this that I want to make sure is clear. We're not just turning into a SUP event only. It's just, we're going to highlight SUP a little differently. And one benefit as well for them, and really our paddle community is we've got the World Championship in Sarasota 2 months after our race. And USA Sup is going to try to kind of pick their representatives that would then go on to the Worlds. And it's not to say if someone didn't come to our race, they couldn't be included, but it's just, it's a way to say, here's some of the best paddlers we got, and we're going to comp your entry into the World Championship. Congratulations. And it just adds something that, we're putting, paddleboarding up into a level kind of like other sports.
Yeah, it's interesting mentioning tennis. Swimming is another big one that comes up when it comes to infrastructure, right? You have so many participants that you can create a lot of infrastructure. It gives the sport legitimacy. It gives it a pathway where I can paddle on some lake in the middle of nowhere and go to a regional qualifier and then go to a national qualifier. Even so I wrestled in high school, and wrestling is not one of the most popular sports in Florida high school athletics, right? But in our district, we have 16 schools. Our region has 64. Then the state has 300. And then there's 3 different classifications for state. So you have 1,000 schools, right? Ton of athletes, but there's so much infrastructure, right? You have step 1, then 2, then 3, and it's a very clear road to get to a state title. And it's not just SUP, like kayak, even with an Olympic outlet, it's a little bit hard to, kind of navigate through that because the numbers are so low. You kind of just jump right to the national scale, right? But having that regional qualifier, it's very important for getting more people involved that aren't like, I'm a national champion, I got to go for it, right? There's only a few people that think that, but in a regional or a state level, you're going to get way more participants, more people, training for, these accolades. And that infrastructure, I think, is really important for all paddling sports
Yeah.
going forward. So,
And I
incorporating
think
that makes a lot of sense.
it potentially sets it up if it becomes a, Olympic sport. We've got disciplines where you've got the sprint, you've got distance, and then you've got a tech event. So, it does, like you said, it just kind of sets things up that there would be a movement towards something where a young athlete could see a pathway to get to some carrot at the end, whether it's competing for the USA or competing just in a national championship, something like that. It'd be great if we had scholarships, at college for some of these rowing, besides rowing, but, for some sports like we're talking about. But, that might be another, thing that develops out of this is if they see some organization to it. And it's, the origin of SUP is with the surfing community, and they don't necessarily like all the organization and the rules and whatnot. And I think that's understandable, but at the same time, it's the sport's old enough and it's disciplined enough away from just traditional surfing. I think that it's time to have some rules and just some, infrastructure, like you said.
So the other progression over time, right? So talking about new races emerging, and again having the finger on the community pulse, being part of Carolina Cup in 2017, a lot different than Carolina Cup 2024, right? And it also on that list would be Key West 2017 is a lot different than Key West last year, right? And then the final Key West is going to be this year, right? So that race is after this, there'll be no more, and then 5 years ago, it would have been really hard to imagine that Key West was not, bringing in 100+ SUP racers, right? So give us some of that from your perspective in participating in a lot of these events, watching that change over time.
Yeah, it's obviously it's a frustrating. You want to, if I go to a race, I want to have other people that are competitive, and I want to, I don't want to jump in the front and just be out by myself. I'd much prefer to be in a pack and, and have a nice, kind of back and forth to it. So from that personally, it's disappointing sometimes to see this happen, but I think, that if I were to go down and do Tuesday night race league and, in Jupiter with the Flying Fish group, that's one of the, you go to a Tuesday night race there, it's one of the most competitive races on the East Coast. So there does seem to be, and I would think, maybe Dana Point for Infinity is somewhat similar as well. There's kind of pockets of people doing this still at an elite level in high numbers. I think, John with Flying Fish is, he's out, 6 months building boards. I think, now with Shrimpy riding for him, there'll probably be a huge order going out to riders in Japan. But I think hopefully the infrastructure with USA SUP will help, the organization will help, and you just get a cycle of other people that will come into the sport as some have moved on, we hope. I just hope we haven't lost too many that, were passionate about it and for some reason lost their passion, whether it had to do with certain negative things at an event or whatnot. I hope that, some folks can look past that. Just, myself running an event, I'm always, I guess, I try to be understanding, just because things happen, and if you can make an effort to fix it, hopefully, paddlers will understand. But some of the critiques of some of the races, I get it, I understand it, and you just got to hope that someone steps up and makes adjustments so that we can continue to go to these great events. Because things like, Carolina Cup, there's just not, I don't know that there's a better place for a race like that. It's such an, you look at just the ability to walk across the street and have an elite level event, and then walk the other way and have a beginner do a 5K. That's pretty incredible. And the course, just the graveyard course, it's just, there's not a better test, for an elite level paddler, whether it's surf ski OC or stand-up paddle. So I hope that, they kind of work out some kinks, and hopefully they'll stay, continue to keep doing the race. But yeah, it's disappointing. Maybe someone will take over Key West and have a new energy and get things going again. So, all these things hopefully just happen for a reason, and we can, get some passionate folks to take the baton and move it forward.
Yeah, both of the places, like you mentioned, location. Oh my God, Wilmington, the town, awesome,
Yeah.
right? It's very centrally located for a lot of the East Coast, even in the middle of Florida. It's like 8 hours, and then 8 hours north of that, right? That gets you, really far up the coast. So the quality of racer that you get is a lot more eclectic, and yeah, like you said, you have the graveyard course, one of the best on the planet, and it's only a critique if all of the races were diminishing. It would be like, okay, there's a trend. But then you turn your head and you look at Chattajack selling out in 9 minutes. It's like
Yeah.
there's a shift, and like some of the race organizers are going with the shift, right? And some of them are not, right? Like you can't have a race have 700 people signing up at midnight and some
Right.
of them not making it in, right? And it's something, to look at. And as a race organizer, like you said, you're very conscientious of this is not working. If I can do something to do it right, that's the thing that keeps it going, right? Talking to the community, people mess up, whatever, like you said, if you make uh, a point to try and fix any issues, right? Most people will still, come out and support an event.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, it's just interesting. I don't know where all these paddlers for Chattajack come from, because they, you look at most events at a good event now, you might have 150 paddlers, and so I think one thing Ben has done well is to, make it it's a kind of a working man's race. It's the folks like me or you that are holding the job down, and it's not necessarily the professional paddlers, but for a lot of folks, it's the timing of it is also good, I think, to have something at that time of year, and be something people have worked towards. I think things like the platform paddle monster, for them to kind of make a specific training for all these folks to kind of gear their year towards Chattajack. That's also in that race's favor of, kind of grooming a lot of paddlers to be at that event. I think it's interesting. So many OC6s are showing up for that race too. So, it's disappointing to see not as many SUP, especially some of the competitive paddlers doing it. But some of them are just, I know Kim Barnes this year is going to be in an OC6. So, some paddlers are just trying different things. If you do it 4 or 5 years in a row on a SUP, it's understandable. You might want to try something different.
So, looking at SUP, one of the things with SUP that has been steadfast since the inception, since the idea of racing them, 14 feet long, right? What is your opinion on that discipline having a very strict specification, while outrigger canoe, surf ski do not adhere to a spec when it comes to long distance racing? And have you ever been on an unlimited board before?
Well, I have not been on an unlimited board. I guess I'm not I, yeah, having grown up doing the windsurfing, I come back to that analogy a little bit, that I like things to a degree, have some one design characteristic, one difference with windsurfing is, like in wrestling, you have weight classification. So,
Mhm.
for me, I remember always trying to stay under 135 pounds, which is hard to imagine at this point. But I know some folks were very frustrated with paddle boards, because if you're a big person, it's very difficult to keep up with a high cadence short individual that's very fit, because you inherently kind of have to use a bigger board, and you're inherently going to be more resistance in the water, more resistance in the wind, etc. So I know a lot of folks that shifted to OC because of that reason. And so as a race director, it's a little frustrating to try to, I like to try to narrow down the categories a little bit. I don't like having, 10 and a half feet and under, 12 and a half feet and under, 14 feet and under, because I'd quickly lose my artist, doing all the trophies if I had to have that many trophies. And my race timer would probably, punch me in the head for that. So I guess I get it that it's nice to kind of narrow it down. It's to some degree good for the sport also, so it's not quite as confusing. If you have a female come in, hey, do I go 12.6 or do I go 14? If I want to be a racer, to some degree, it's made that a little simplified. And I think, one nice thing nowadays is, for smaller paddlers, you can get, less volume with the 14 feet and still be very efficient, and kind of like they were with the 12.6. If they felt like, in the old, if you get a smaller paddler on that old Bark Dominator, they would say, man, this thing is huge. It's really catching a lot of wind and current, and I don't feel like I have a good feel for the water in this thing. But you get them on a appropriate sized, thin, less volume paddleboard. I think all of a sudden they're moving it very quickly, just like we would in the larger paddleboard. So I have mixed feelings on it. I don't know the best answer there moving forward with, what carries the sport forward better. I don't know the answer to that. But I know from just my personal experience, it took me standing on something longer and faster to say, this is what I like. I didn't like the heavier plastic boards. That just wasn't doing it for me. But I understand the idea of, having boards set out, like Danny does at some of his races. I understand that concept just because of my background in windsurfing. But unless you were to, really narrow it down and say, okay, what's your weight? And we put you against similar weight individuals, it's really not a fair one design test in paddleboarding, in my opinion. But the concept I like that it's simple. I like that people could show up and, just race, and you're not, not going to be, you're not going to lose a race because you just didn't buy the fastest board type thing. But there's definitely two sides to that story on which way to go. And from a personal level, I like fast and 14 feet. I'd probably like the unlimited board, but I got to narrow my toys down a little bit.
Yeah, and it's funny because they live in direct harmony, like surf ski, right? Like you can have a 14 by 23 inch, or you can have a 21 foot by 16 inch, right? And those are two vastly different crafts. And it doesn't feel like that. Even outrigger canoe, there's 18-foot outrigger canoes now, and now you got 21-foot ones, and it doesn't feel like it slows down or hinders people's perception of the sport so much. Like you said, the 14-foot, it's tough. If you're 6'6" and 250 pounds, you're a big human, and 14 foot is it's tough to find the volume, right, to be successful. Yeah. But you put that athlete on an 18-foot board, and oh my God, they blossom, right? Because they're going to go fast proportional to their size. And the reason I always bring this up is in surf ski, when you go from a 14-foot hull to a 16-foot hull, it's like night and day. But then when you go from 16 foot to 18 foot, you can barely tell, right? It's not the length anymore. It's more so the width. And so I always feel like when I get on a sup that, like, if the board was like 2 feet longer, you would get 10% more efficiency out of it. Literally like 6.0 miles an hour to like 6.6 if it just had that little extra length. And that's one of the things that draws me to the sit-down craft is when they design them, this is the fastest thing we could come up with no parameters. This was the final product, and it happened to be 19 and a half feet by whatever, right? And I always wish that SUP had that outlet where they're like, we just want to make the fastest thing and put somebody on it, right? And for me personally, that's always a draw. Like you said, infrastructure-wise, it's hard to change a category into an open. Every company's scrambling to make all these weird boards, doing the R&D. And I feel like that would hold back the sport in the short term. But long term, it's something I always dream of. It's like you just race up. You have whatever, you just bring it. If it matches your size, it matches the environment you're in, and you just bring the fastest weapon that you got.
Yeah, I think, you have that experience from the other boats to share, and I don't. I just, I got one surf ski. I don't, I haven't dabbled in the OC world yet. So, I think one other thing that's unique to SUP to a degree is the surfability, the maneuverability, and obviously that would be an issue as well. Getting a unlimited board, you're gonna lose some of that aspect of things. I know I've heard some of the elite athletes, elite racers, they wouldn't mind having a 12.6 board for some of the tech races, because they feel like they can get up to speed quickly, maneuver it quicker. And especially if you were on a wave, you're going to be a little better off maneuvering that versus a 14-foot. So, there, I kind of, I think it's an aspect of the sport that is tough to please everyone. And I hope that, at least we can catch most people with 14 and under. And then maybe for some of these longer events, that are especially in more flatter conditions, I might like to try one of those unlimited boards.
So the other place that we're losing SUP racers to from like my Facebook friends list, and we don't talk about it on the podcast much because we're paddling, right? Human powered propulsion is wing foil boards, right? Where people go out, and I've seen
Yeah.
John Batson also on a wing foil board recently, and I thought, oh, that's it. He's gone.
Yeah.
He's gonna go 20 miles an hour in circles instead of paddling it. So there's all these new innovations, and sometimes they don't lead right back into paddle sports. They lead into something else, water related, wind powered, right? And so you never know where these people, where their true interest is at, right? That's one of the reasons I don't use wind powered stuff because I'm scared. Like I need another hobby, like a hole in the head. Like I do
Yeah.
kite once, and I'm like, yep, that's it. Everything's gone. I freaking kiteboard 30 miles an hour into hurricane winds, and that's my thing, right?
Yeah.
So, keeping people within the community, I think is awesome, but ultimately, when something new and shiny appears, there's a lot of people that are just going to be drawn into that next hobby.
Right. It's interesting, just from, if you were a football player, there's like there'd be little innovation or little change in your sport through your whole life. Okay, maybe we did a little better with helmets now versus 20 years ago, but obviously a big difference from just leather wrap on your head. But for most people nowadays, those traditional sports, there's really not much change. But you look at all these sports that I kind of grew up doing and that you're into, they've evolved in front of us, and it's like paddleboarding. You've gone from wide and slow to a fast board, shorter paddle. Obviously those things change injury rates and change how you enjoy the sport because it makes it more comfortable. And then all of a sudden you look at kite surfing and how that was so dangerous at first, and now there's all this safety that goes with it that keeps most people out of trouble. And then wing surfing now, anything with a foil on it now. All these things are just evolving right in front of us, so it's kind of cool. But it is a little, just it spins around. It's like a whirlwind of next year is something totally different, and you're like, God, I wish I didn't buy this thing because now nobody wants it because it's outdated already. For me, if it's windy, I still like to do my wind sports. So whether it's kite surfing or the wing foiling, I still like to do that. So I suffer a little bit because I'm not as good at downwinding and surf and all that stuff on the paddleboard or the OC or the surf ski for that matter. But I do am able to find at least a reasonable balance with it. If I haven't, like tonight, if I have an hour and a half after work, rather than run to the beach, rig up gear, get out there for 30 minutes, maybe the wind dies, then I'm running back home. I can hop in the water, paddle, and I know I'm going to get a good workout for an hour. And so to some degree, Monday through Friday, that's my thing. And then on the weekend, anything goes. If it's windy, I'm going to be doing something else. And it's nice to have balance. It's nice those those skills carry over in some ways to other aspects of paddling as well. And who knows, maybe we'll try something, one of these downwind paddle foils next, but you gotta, like you said, you gotta kind of draw the line somewhere, and my wife regulates my toys pretty well. So, I didn't buy the OC. I just got a paddle. I'm just dabbling in that one.
Awesome. So, John, thank you so much. Is there anything you want to say to the viewers of the podcast before we turn off the mic?
No, I hope everyone can make it to the OluKai Lowcountry Boil this year. If people have any thoughts on just improving the race, or I'm a board member with USA Sup this year as well. So if you have thoughts on just issues related to stand-up paddling and where the direction of the infrastructure is going, we certainly reach out to me and let me know. And if anyone has questions related to the race and where to stay and whatnot, we'll just shoot me a message and we'll get you hooked up.
Awesome. Yep. And that is happening September 6th to the 8th, right?
That's correct.
Awesome.
It's a great time of year to come to Hilton Head because things have winded down a little bit through the tourists have left, schools have started back, and the locals are coming out of hiding and love to come to see events like the Lowcountry Boil. So, and also just remember, we're doing it as a fundraiser. It's supporting getting kids in kayaks. So it's exactly who we want getting into the sport. If this last year, the Outside Foundation, this was our first year getting every kid in our county, Beaufort County, in a kayak during their middle school years. So regardless of their income level. So it's a cool organization, comes full circle to, bringing all of these elite level adult paddlers down to Hilton Head. The organization is trying to get kids in kayaks. So it's a great event to support. Hopefully we'll have a good turnout.
Killer. John, thank you so much for what you do for the community. Thank you so much for taking time coming on the podcast.
Thanks, Robert.
Cool. Awesome, everybody. We will see you all next Monday for the next episode of the Paddling Pursuit.